Welcome back. So next up we have Grant Miller from Ingenuity Engine, Creative Director and Visual Effects Supervisor, correct?
Indeed.
Oh, I've been saying that quite a few times. He's going to be showing Nuke Studio and Modo on the Power Rangers fan film that's had over 14 million hits to date on YouTube, which is pretty awesome.
Pretty good deal. Good deal for us.
That is pretty good. That is pretty good. So we are taking questions for Grant via hashtag TFNAB. Brad will be asking them on your behalf. So I am going to let Grant go for it.
Thank you, Bex. As Bex said, Grant Miller, Creative Director and VFX Soup at Ingenuity. Ingenuity is a Los Angeles-based post facility. We've been doing post for 11 years, do a wide variety of work on commercials, television, feature film, and one of my favorite things about Ingenuity is just the consistency in the team. So from job to job, it's the same great talent, the same friendly faces, and it makes it nice for me as a supervisor because I come to work every day with a great group of artists who can really trust each other and know each other's strengths and kind of have each other's backs in production. We use a variety of Foundry products to get that work done. Mari and Modo on the 3D side, and then Nuke, Nuke X, Nuke Studio, and Hero for all our conform. So give a watch to our latest reel and have a sense of what we do every day. Cool. So thank you, guys. One of the first things I want to talk about is Nuke Studio's role in production. So it's been out for about 6 months now, and I feel like a lot of people are still trying to kind of figure out where Nuke Studio fits into their pipeline. And one of those ways is an online tool. So Nuke Studio comes with the kind of full feature set that Hero does, which is what we'd done all our onlines with previously, and then also all of the compositing tools that Nuke offers on top of that. So it's really great for doing client attends and stuff like that. But one of the areas that we found it works best as is a sequence tool for compositors. So, and there's a lot of kind of benefits to using Nuke Studio in this fashion. The biggest for me is consistency in effects. So there's tons of scenarios where you want to work on a sequence of shots as a whole. When you're doing beauty or set extension or kind of anything where you need stuff to match from shot to shot, sky replacements. And the nice part about Nuke Studio is you can just copy paste that setup from shot to shot and pop into the next one, paste it, keep on working. And that setup reuse really leads to a lot of consistency in comp layout. So when the shots maybe get 50 or 75% done in Nuke Studio and then go out to another artist to finish them off, the comps are all laid out the same. It's all kind of a familiar setup. So you get that benefit just kind of right off the bat. The other one is that you can do iterations easier. So when you have 40 beauty shots on a television show and you get a note that's, we need the beauty knocked back by 50%, that's kind of a pain to do in Nuke. You're kind of going into each of the shots and making that change. And if you have all those shots loaded up into Nuke Studio, it's very straightforward to just go into each shot, knock the beauty back, hop into the next shot, and keep on working. And that leads to faster work, faster turnarounds, and it's also just more enjoyable compositing. You're not waiting on Nuke to open and browsing to the path of the script and then starting the shot and then closing and saving and going on, browsing to the next script. So it's just a little friendlier workflow. There's some production tips for using Nuke Studio in that fashion. The first is that all your comps need to be versioned, and also the renders out of those comps need to be versioned. Nuke Studio really is great at comparing previous version to the current version, so you can see if you've actually done the notes or if maybe you've just screwed something up entirely. And we find it's easiest to just lock the version that you're rendering out to the version of the script that you're saving. So there's a little Python snippet. I'm not going to go through it all, but you can pause the video and kind of copy that down. The biggest thing is that when you're setting those dynamic save paths, you need to do them on save, not before render, because that's when Nuke Studio cares about that script path. And you also need one write node per comp. I talked to John about this, and I have a solution for it, so I'll try to post that. But you can basically flag it with like a bit of user knob and say that this is the winner write node. So now I'm going to talk about smart compositing, doing Nuke Studio and film. And first of all, I want to start off by showing the before and after of the Power Rangers short. This short was a film that was directed by Joseph Kahn, who we've worked with for ages. And he came to us maybe 7 months ago, shot in July, and then we did about 6 months worth of post. And the post was it was stolen from other jobs, sort of. You'd work for 4 days on the work that you really had to do, and then you'd sneak a day in on Power Rangers, unbeknownst to our clients. So it was really kind of a labor of love, and due to the time and budgetary constraints, we had to really work as efficiently as possible. So we cut every corner there was. We cut through the field completely. But ultimately, it was a really great project for us. It got a lot of play. Anyone seen it here? Yes? Yay. Cool. Awesome. So watch the before and after, get a sense of the work. This is my favorite part of this breakdown. No knives. Thank you, guys. So that last shot, she does not fit inside at all. We started that transition, and I was like, this doesn't physics working. So working on sequences in Nuke Studio, just because you haven't started a project in Nuke Studio doesn't mean you can't still utilize it in your pipeline. If you've got a hero project that's been used to do the conform, you can use that as a base. Nuke Studio will open that. But you can also just import comps straight into Nuke Studio, which a lot of people don't really realize. You just browse to the comp and import it like it's a regular clip, and then Nuke Studio will treat it just as such. So you can drag it into a sequence, view those shots in sequence, and you're instantly able to scrub back and forth in that timeline and look at your shots in context and kind of make changes to the shots around it by just double-clicking on the comp and hopping into it. So that workflow for me is really nice. We only have 2 Nuke Studio licenses currently, and it's kind of a fight to get the Nuke Studio license in the morning because it's the fastest way to get your job done. So you tend to like get it and camp out on it and try to use it as much as possible. And making those changes inside of Nuke Studio is very straightforward. And then just some settings here that if you save, it'll automatically start rendering, and kind of the render limits to set your box up. Nuke Studio, the way it renders comps, kind of renders in the background and uses all of the threads on your machine. So it actually ends up rendering a lot quicker than just regular Nuke does, which is really nice because you don't send stuff off to the farm so much. You kind of just get that feedback live on your own box. And that's really great, but when we're doing 40 shots on a television show, it's kind of not ideal. So we wrote a tool that lets us just specify the root of a project and then the path to the comp folder, and then just select the shots you want to import, and it'll import all those comps straight into Nuke Studio. So you're effectively just making like a kind of a trash Nuke Studio project that you don't really care about because all the work is still saved inside the composites themselves. So if I want to work on the first 5 shots in a sequence and someone wants to work on the second half of the sequence, it's very simple to kind of set up a Nuke Studio project in that fashion. And that's one of the things that's really allowed us to use Nuke Studio more. It's not just sitting in the online bay with the online artists. It's really kind of come out onto the floor and being used by the compositors. So this is one of my favorite shots in this Korean fight sequence. The stunt guy doesn't quite land his jump from the ceiling perfectly, so we had to warp his legs so that he doesn't do a little stutter step there. And then in the beginning, he's just hanging from the ceiling and drops down. It's always great to me to work on projects like this where you do have kind of budgetary constraints and you have to get creative with the visual effects that you're doing and say, yeah, just hang him from the ceiling. It'll be fine. We'll just paint him out. Instead of doing a big rig and doing 20 takes so that he sticks his landing perfectly, you just kind of shoot it and you're done, and you just fix it in post, but in a smart, intelligent way, not in the way that the agencies use that word sometimes. So here I've decided that the lens splatter from the blood felt a little pink in this shot compared to a previous shot, so I can pop into Nuke's regular just Nuke comp and make those changes, throw a color corrector on there, redden that blood up a little bit, And then when I jump back to the timeline, Nuke Studio will start rendering in the background, and I can, meanwhile, keep working on other shots and kind of match all that stuff. So it's just really nice to be able to work on a project as a whole and address notes as a whole, you know, whether you're sitting with a client or whether you're just working on the shots yourself on your box. And this scrubbing is all real time too. That's another huge deal. I mean, it's a very quick program to kind of come into and view. The DPXs for this are all living on the network still, so it's all pulling off of a RAID. So it's not slow by any means. It's very nice feedback. Next, I want to talk about doing Digimat with Nuke and Modo. This city shot was kind of the first big establishing shot in the short film where you really are like, oh, we're in the future. I get it. So you can see here this was a plate that we started out with. We painted out the U.S. Bank sign and kind of all of the rest of the downtown LA signs for probably the 4th time this year, and then added in a lot of buildings and ships and stuff like that. The original map painting was kind of sourced from another job, and it was flattened with no real alphas for any of the buildings or back paint or anything like that. So we decided to take that into Nuke and do all that work there. And we cut out all the buildings in Nuke and then just kind of roughly placed them in the city where we thought we would end up sticking them ultimately, and got that approved and signed off on, and then sent that across to Modo to build out projection geometry. Modo has a lot of great projection tools. It's very, very friendly to pull in the plates, pull in the tracked camera, and set that up inside of Modo, and you're viewing really a high resolution plate in Modo. It's not like a 512 texture that's kind of grainy and you can't really tell what's going on. It's the pristine projected plate. So here we have that camera track in the original plate. I set the plate to linear. Nuke and Modo both have Open Color I/O as their color management, and it's nice to be able to just switch that stuff when you need it. The plate's super dark otherwise, and you can't really tell what's going on. So here I pull in the individual buildings, and then we're going to build out just kind of this round cone-shaped building that's, I'm sure, just copy-pasted from the London skyline. Bex can probably attest. And one of the nice tools in Modo is the fall-off tools. So I add a ton of segments to this building, and then using the fall-off tools, it's very easy to interactively match the curvature of that building, which would be kind of a pain to do anywhere else, especially with a mesh that's dense enough to do reprojection on back inside of Nuke. When I'm building projection geometry, I always like to put a card that's kind of in the middle of that building that just kind of serves as a catch-all for any sort of antennas or any sort of defocusing that needs to happen after the fact. So here's the final projection geometry built out in Modo. The reason I like to build this geometry out in Modo is one, because it's a 3D package that has a lot of 3D tools. You could put this stuff on cards in Nuke, but the real benefit of doing it in Modo is that you can add the complexity of the geometry that you need to have the matte painting not just kind of feel like it's tossed on cards. So having bevels and detail and stuff in those buildings really helps them feel like they're projected and moving properly and parallaxing properly. Next, I want to talk about building some of these ships in Modo. This ship started out as just like a 2D concept. This program I'm using here is Alchemy. It's a free Java program. It has symmetry. It's the only reason I use it, but I've used it for ages. And pulling those backdrop items into Modo is really as simple as just dragging and dropping them in. They come in scaled properly. They come in kind of to the resolution of the image that you pulled in. You can make them transparent. You can move them around, set them to top, flip them. So it's really easy to work with reference. Here I'm using that fall off tool again to match the shape of that ship. And then I go in and start kind of sculpting out just a rough concept of what these forms are going to look like, because I just have two kind of silhouette drawings. And I had already started sculpting, and I checked the concept and realized I'd forgotten to model the engines. And that wasn't intentional. I just didn't remember. But I can go in and modify that base mesh and then go back to the sculpt and still keep all the sculpted detail that I started on already, which is a huge deal. There's tons of times where you just kind of forget that you need something, and to be able to keep that sculpting while still modifying that base mesh is a really big solve. Modo's sculpting tool set is kind of the standard package of move and push and pinch and stuff like that. Here I'm using the kind of the slash brush to cut some of these panel lines in and then pinch those down. And to finish off this model, to finish off this base, I just go back to the base model that I had and I align the work plane to this kind of slanted wing. So any operations now that I'm doing in Modo will be relative to that kind of slanted wing geometry. So it's really easy to kind of get to work in that space and not have to kind of fight the tools. Modo really does a good job of bringing together a lot of different tools that you might go to a different package to use under one roof. So I have the topology tools, and I can easily kind of hop into the topology tab, retopologize some of this ship, and then build different parts off of different parts of the ship based on that. And the sculpting tools are also always available to you. So the push brush I can use on my high poly geometry just as easily as I could use it when I'm actually doing the sculpt. So it's just nice to kind of be able to jump from tool to tool that otherwise you might have to leave the package and go to something else, export it, import it, that whole process. So it's quicker, you can work faster, you can be a little more creative. Again, using the fall off tools to kind of put the angle on the front of that ship. So here's the kind of rough base that we end up with. I forgot again to model the engines because for some reason I don't want this ship to have engines. And another nice thing about Modo is just the base kind of tools that it's comes with. So the bevel tool is really like inset and extrude and bevel kind of all in one without leaving it and going into a different tool. You can just kind of quickly bevel stuff out, inset it, bevel it back in, and it makes working on stuff like that very quick. Detailing this ship out, so we have a giant package of just random parts from everything we've ever built that we just keep adding to. And we import those and just kind of use them in a lot of different ways. Modo has some good clone tools for working with this stuff. So here I can use the clone tool, which is interactive, to kind of just space these brackets under here, kind of how I want them. And then they're just geometry at the end of the day, so I can still scale the middle one individually. They're not like a modifier or anything that's baked down like that. One of the nice parts about doing kit bash like this is that you find different ways to use pieces that you've made already. So I'm using this bracket and kind of scaling it and mushing it around and turning it into a pair of chairs for the ship that we're creating. And I think that's the nice thing is you get a lot of kind of happy accidents and kind of reusing bits and pieces in a way that you didn't intend previously. And then combining that with just traditional modeling and a little more clone tool. The nice part about the clone tool in Modo is not only can you do translation, but you can do rotation and scale as well. So the back of this chair actually kind of scales out a little bit and rotates in a little bit to match the curvature. And that's all interactive, so you can just kind of dial that in and as you're looking at it. So here's the final ship with all the kit bash. And the kit bash stuff looks really nice, but now our ship model kind of looks a little boxy and not so detailed. So one of the ways I've found I like to do that detailing is with mesh fusion. I've struggled to do a whole mesh from the beginning with mesh fusion, but I find it works really well to add details to your objects that would otherwise just be unachievable. As Mariana showed previously, mesh fusion is just kind of Booleans. But it's Booleans that you can use in production and that actually give you geometry that doesn't suck. So here I'm cutting the kind of front of this top piece off with just a simple cube that I've pulled in. And it gives you really nice milled edges. It kind of looks like it was made at a factory that knows what they're doing and not by some sort of hapless artist. And you get a lot of happy accidents too. I thought I was going to slice this whole side off, but I found that just kind of insetting it a little bit and leaving a little crease that goes to the back resulted in some more interesting shapes. So here I use the topology tool again to draw in some panel lines on the top of this ship piece here. And that's the thing I said I liked about Modo. It's just you can hop in and you can do some topology, and then you can use mesh fusion and kind of cut that panel line into that quarter panel. And doing this would be such a pain otherwise. You'd have to really consider how the topology is going to flow with this quarter panel line. And if the director came back and said, I want, you know, two that cut across in a different way, you'd have to start that mesh all over. Whereas with Mesh Fusion, you can just cut it in, stick it there. It's all still live and interactive. So if you need to make updates or changes to that at a later date, it's very straightforward. I think next I work on this wing. Do a little bit of renaming. Name your stuff. Name your objects. Keep your stuff organized. It's going to someone else eventually. Someone's going to have to open your scene. So originally I thought I was going to punch a hole through this wing, but I found with Mesh Fusion that kind of just letting that back triangle kind of slide through gave the ship's wing a little better shape. And again, that's the benefit of using a tool like this where it is all interactive and you can kind of make decisions on the fly and try out different things and see which option looks the best. So here's the final ship with all the Mesh Fusion detail. And you can see we've kind of taken that boxy shape and really added a lot of interesting cut lines in there and made it something that feels a little more unique. And the nice part about all the Mesh Fusion detail, like I said, is it's all still live at this point. And you know, it gives you clean topology with loops that go around your panels and your cut lines and stuff like that. And you can come back in and say, you know, oh, the front of this, the bevel isn't quite deep enough. Let's make it a little deeper so that we can see it when the reflection hits. And this back edge seems like it needs to round off a little bit more. So it's being able to make those kind of adjustments and those kind of changes in a procedural fashion where you don't have to start over or where you're not dealing with incredibly dense geometry and kind of ending up with a wonky result. So there's our turntable of our final mesh and then render of that same final mesh. So I just threw some simple shaders on this. The total recorded time for this ship model I think was like 3.5 hours for the videos. So it's really not that much work to get to something that, you know, is ultimately 10 pixels on the screen and doesn't really matter, but you know, I still know that it's a ship and that if we want to get a little closer to it, we can. The next thing I want to talk about is doing Digimat work in Nuke with deep compositing. And to do this, I'm going to walk through just this city shot from start to finish so we can get a sense of kind of what's involved in the comp. So we started off with the tracked camera. And the first, kind of the most background layer is this sky replacement that we've done of just kind of a murky sky and some, you know, mountains in the distance and stuff like that. And then we have our plate here, brighten this up, and just, again, the sign paint out, the matte painting for the right building that was deemed a little too bright. And then all of that is reprojected onto the ground as a base with the sky. And then we start off with the city matte. And each of those buildings is just cut out and projected onto the geometry that we pull in. So there's a building cut out, projected on down the tree. So it's a large comp, but it's really just the projection of each of the buildings and then the individual color correction of the buildings to get them to sit kind of where they needed to in the given shot. So there's all the buildings projected. And if we scroll down to this comp, we can see that we've also cut out and reprojected all of the foreground buildings as well. And that was crucial to give us the mats that we needed to sit the buildings inside, you know, in and amongst the original buildings that are in the plate. So those are all the foreground buildings projected, and then that's our final scene with all the buildings all in 3D space. So when we render that out of the scanline render in Nuke, we render it out deep and then can use it as a holdout for any other assets that we want to add to that scene. So for instance, we added a lot of antennas and just kind of various add-ons and stuff like that to the buildings. We can use a deep holdout for those. Same with the fog and the smoke. Those were all just elements that were on cards in Nuke. And again, we can use the holdout to sit those into the city so that the fog is behind the buildings that it should be and in front of the buildings that it should be. And then finally the ships with the same holdouts from all the way up the tree. Doing this comp without deep would be a giant pain. To kind of sort out where the roto goes in 2D, you'd never be able to kind of figure out, okay, this building comes in front of this building but behind these ships, and it'd be a whole disaster. Whereas working in deep inside of Nuke, you're able to work in a common scene setup, see where your stuff is in 3D, know that you're placing this card behind the building in front of those ships, etc. So those are really the biggest benefits behind that workflow, and I can't recommend it enough for doing kind of integration like this where your map painting needs to live in and amongst, not just behind stuff. I want to thank all the artists at Ingenuity who are back home working so that I can be here. Without them, all this work wouldn't be possible. And thank the Foundry for giving me the opportunity to do this presentation.
So as long as we're throwing thanks around, I name checked you earlier because I've met you first when you did a demo for us at the RFX event for Nuke Studio, and I said that you opened my eyes to a lot of the different ways Nuke can be used. For those who don't know, I was involved with Modo since its very birth, and you've opened my eyes to ways to use Modo. So thank you. That was very inspirational.
Appreciate it.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I am a big advocate of being open and honest. Your demo reel was phenomenal. You've come up here and you've championed Nuke and you've championed Modo, but your demo reel is largely on the 3D side, 3D Studio Max and V-Ray. I
Absolutely.
want to make sure that's very clear, because I don't want anybody to assume that we're trying to take credit for work that other products have done.
We've used 3D Studio Max for the first 10 years of our company, and V-Ray for pretty much the same. And we recently made the switch to Modo really during the Power Rangers product. And it's been good so far.
So this is what makes my mind hurt. So I'm watching you use Modo on that ship, and you're using it like a 30-year Modo veteran, even though Modo's only been around for 14. How have you made that? I mean, you made that transition in December, is that right? That's basically when you guys switched over.
Yeah,
last year.
like we started with the trial in November or December, and then kind of we're like, all right, we can do the work that we do in this program. And we made the full switch, I think, like December, start of the year.
So anybody who's looking to add Modo to their pipeline, any suggestions you have for them on that migration?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is just figuring out kind of how you're going to do the scene assembly, how you're going to reference stuff in, and how to kind of keep that in line. We've really enjoyed the rendering in Modo. I think that's probably the aspect of it that I enjoy the most. It feels like one package that was kind of all made at the same time, instead of a lot of the older 3D packages kind of have this golf cart with a turbocharger kind of feel to it. It's like you've bought a bunch of plugins and you've kind of added them on to your stuff, whereas Modo, it's like it was all made at the same time and it all is integrated and the renderer works together with the topology and it all kind of just vibes. So that's really nice. That's been really nice for us.
And have you, aside from just diving in, and are there any resources you've tapped into, community, documentation? What have you found has been most useful for you in that path?
We had the benefit of having one of you guys, one of the Foundry training people come out, and that was...
Which we do.
Yeah, which they do. They do training. I had no idea. But we had one of those guys come out for like a day and got, I think, more done in that day in terms of just kind of adopting Modo and figuring out the quirks and figuring out how it works. So that was really... That's probably the biggest tip I could say, is just that is worthwhile, and it's a worthwhile investment because it gets you up and running quickly, and you're saving the time that artists would be spending looking up silly questions on the internet that are hard to ask, like, where's this tool that I have in Max? And it's like, no one asked that on the forum yet. No one knows. Right. You need a professional.
Yeah. So, I mentioned you sort of opened my eyes to the way you use Modo, and I thought it was great the way that, when we show Mesh Fusion, we often just go load a few of the cubics in and start from a blank screen. I love the concept of, and this really illustrates the power of the tool set in Modo, is that you can use it the way you want.
Yeah.
You can, with Mesh Fusion, you can either start blank screen or you can add things. I loved that you went in and modeled a Mesh Fusion strip with topology tools. What a great innovation.
And then it makes panel lines like that like a breeze. It's just you cut them in wherever. Like you can cut a big, dumb diagonal panel line all across this ship, and it doesn't matter. Whereas any other program, that'd be a giant pain. So it's really nice.
All right, so I'm going to switch over. I could just Modo love for hours, but I'm going to switch over and ask you some Nuke questions because I saw some stuff. First of all, a practical question. What did they use for the brains? Do you know?
We used intestines, and then we got a professional person the second time we shot Elements, and they were like, never use actual animal products. And we were like, eh. And she used some sort of like jelly mix, like glycerin of some sort that was colored with food coloring. She was a whiz.
It was disgusting.
It's gross. We shot so many gross blood elements.
So the shot that you said that you loved the most was the knives, right? I thought that was awesome.
It's hilarious. They're not holding. They're just doing this. It's just me and you, and then we just add the knives later.
So did you hand animate those, or were those tracked and then?
They were hand animated. Hand animated by Chris Canabo, who's professional animator extraordinaire.
That's
He's watching, I'm sure, and just
pathological.
Yeah. It
was insanity.
800 and some frames of just knives for days.
And then you also briefly touched on the custom tool that you created for Nuke.
Yeah.
For import. Was that done in Python, or was that?
Yeah, it's done in Python.
So go ahead.
It's nice to have, like, all the Foundry products have Python, right? But it's easy to have a program with timeline that has Python now, which we've never really had before. Like, it's always, Nuke has timeline, or Nuke doesn't really have a timeline to work with. So having the ability to kind of import all those clips into a sequence has been fantastic.
Yeah, and this is so. I think people often think of custom tools as the land of the large studio, the land of the place that has their own IT, their own development infrastructure. But you guys are not a huge studio.
We're 20 people when we're big, and that tool is like 500 lines of Python, maybe tops. I mean, it's not much, and I had not written anything. Is the first thing I wrote for Nuke Studio. So it's like, open up the API, follow the tutorials a little bit. All right, this is how you import stuff. I'm going to import these comps and stick them in a sequence. So it's not that difficult to get some stuff done.
Yeah, this is the thing that I like about the movement towards Python is there's almost a development strategy that's cut and paste.
Yeah, I mean, most of that tool is just the build a project from scratch in Nuke Studio example with some modifications and a bit of UI. So it's not really, doesn't take much to achieve.
And I mentioned or asked Sean earlier when he was doing his presentation in terms of customization of Nuke. I know also a lot of people use gizmos. Do you guys use a lot of gizmos in-house?
So many gizmos. We gizmo so many silly things. Like there's a gizmo that blinks those red lights on buildings. Gizmo. You just set how often you want to blink them, how frequently, how long they were to go on, what their fade on is. Blinking lights for days.
So for those who don't know Nuke, give us a brief rundown on what a gizmo is and how you guys use them.
A gizmo is the simplest form of kind of scripting inside of Nuke. You have maybe 10 nodes that you use all the time to do a certain effect. Hit Control-G, group them up, and then you just expose the things that you want. And the nice part about it is that it makes that tool kind of interactive, so you can change the blur knob and then change the mix knob and not have to switch to a bunch of different nodes. So you get to kind of play with it a little more. And then it's also just faster. So it's really a kind of double whammy. Is that it? Are we done?
Sorry,
Hi,
I was checking. I was listening to you,
Bex
checking
is cutting
in with
our
her.
time, I'm sure.
No, I've got some comments for
Okay.
you. So, wow, that's not the Power Rangers I grew up with, but it looks amazing. Love the workflow. Excellent use of your kit bashing assets as well as modeling skills with Mesh Fusion to top it off. Exclamation mark. Grant Miller is awesome. Incredible artist.
Agreed.
So I do have two questions. Which do you like? Actually, we'll ask this last. Are those particles or smoke effects done on Modo?
The particles for the city, I guess maybe they're talking
I'm
about?
guessing
The
so.
smoke
I was
for
going to
the
ask
city?
you the same question.
Yeah,
I think probably they're talking about the pyro, would be my guess.
The pyro.
There were a lot of pyro effects that were like smoke and
So there's a ton of
bigger
pyro
effects.
that we do. We've done historically in Fume, and now we're kind of doing more in Houdini. The clouds in the city were elements that were chronosed down to like 1/10 the speed and then just stuck on cards, which worked out fine for the shot, but I would not probably do in a professional It was the cut across the cornfield mentality on that job.
So I'm going to give a shout out to another one of our partners, which, of course, the Next Limit guys who do Real Flow also, because I know, not for that, but I know that you've historically done a lot of Real Flow, and that's the thing. It works well with, you can do particles in Modo, but if you're going to get serious, you want to get into a tool like Real Flow.
And you can pull it in and it's fine. I mean, the first big job that we did in Modo was completely simmed in Real Flow, meshed in Real Flow, and then we just pulled it back into Modo and rendered it, and it's great.
Plays well with others.
Plays well with others.
All right, Bex.
We're just giggling here because I've just been told to stand on tiptoes because you can't see me.
Or we can
We're
duck.
trying to work out a box notes, these things. Which do you like modeling more, spaceships or megazords?
The spaceship was really nice because I just was deciding what that spaceship looked like, and it didn't really matter. The Megazord, we had to kind of stick with the Power Rangers universe, but kind of modify it a little bit, and it was an incredibly complex model. There's a lot of moving parts in there, and it's not as fun as just kind of bashing something together for a demo really quickly. So I would say the ships. Everyone, all CG artists on the whole planet love modeling ships. It's widely known.
Awesome. Okay, another round of applause for Grant Miller.
Thank you much.